Hello everyone and welcome. It is Supersonic Duck here once again coming at you with another deck profile video. I have not meant for it to be so long since I last uploaded, so my apologies. I've just been super busy, super distracted, and I actually built this deck a good while back, but I just never got around to recording the video for it. And there'll be more nostalgic old school, maybe even modern Yu-Gi-Oh deck profiles up and coming on this channel, so if you're interested in that, do subscribe. So this deck is a really cool deck, a really special deck for me. This is, I call it Different Dimension Monarch or Different Dimension Control. It's based off of the Dark Emperor structure deck. It was the first structure deck I ever got and the first proper strong deck I ever had in Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was a kid, I was trying to get the Dinosaurs Raid structure deck, but in the store there was only the Dark Emperor structure deck. So my dad got one for my brother and my brother gave me his deck when he got fed up with Yu-Gi-Oh! So I actually had a pretty solid Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. This would have been back in 2008. I remember it was around the same time as the Simpsons movie came out, because I remember after getting the structure deck, we went to see the Simpsons movie. But anyway, this deck served me very, very well. This isn't like an exact list of what I had. When I finally made friends who played Yu-Gi-Oh! They often had better cards than me. They invested more in the game. They made better trades. I made some terrible trades. Like I remember I traded a Scrap Archfiend for like Lycanthrope. That was a terrible idea. It was one of my only synchros. Anyway, I just thought the werewolf was cool. But anyway, this deck served me very well because in Yu-Gi-Oh! The natural state of the game is that cards tend to go to the graveyard, and decks, started to rise that really benefited off of, taking advantage of the graveyard mechanic. And this deck kind of turns that whole strategy up on its head because it prevents cards from going to the graveyard to powerful floodgate cards like Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure. So when, my friends had more modern up-to-date decks, this deck would still often be able to hold its own against those decks because of the fact that it messed up with their strategy so much. And there's just so many different removal options that this deck has as well. And I've been playing a deck like this all the way up until 2014. I remember during Hat format, I was playing against Ghost Strix, going up against Lightsworns with this kind of deck. I didn't win all the time, but every single game I played was fun, even the ones that I lost, because to finally beat this deck often took so long. This is another fun thing about this deck. It's a very grindy deck that takes quite a long time to play, so you get some good fun long games that are really back and forth. So I really love this deck a lot. So anyway, I won't bore you with all the backstory. I'll just get straight into the deck profile. I chose to make this deck for an Edison format deck because it kind of had a lot of the cool cards that I liked. A lot of those cards were kind of legal to play in the deck in that format, and this deck is still kind of viable in that format as well because power creep hadn't gotten too bad up at that point. So without further ado, let's get into the deck profile. To start off with the monsters, we have 3 copies of Caius the Shadow Monarch. As you can see, this is my original one. I traded my other original one away to a friend. But anyway, this Caius is insanely powerful. He changed the game when he first came out. When he's tribute summoned, mandatorily he banishes a card on the field. So that's really powerful because a lot of cards have immunity to being destroyed, but Caius banishes them. And it can be a monster, spell, or trap. And it happens to be a dark attribute monster, and you burn your opponent for 1,000 damage. And this one friend of mine, he was very good at the game when I first met him, and I wasn't. So I would always lose against him, but the first time I ever beat him in a duel, it was by tribute summoning for Caius the Shadow Monarch. I think it was this very card right here, and then I banished this monster and attacked for game, and I didn't even realize. I was like, oh my gosh, his life points are 0. I won. I didn't even realize it won. But yeah, this card's absolutely insane. It's an amazing card. And now for the DD monsters, Different Dimension. I always thought it was Different Dimension, but maybe it's Dark Dimension, I'm not too sure. But first off, we have 3 copies of DD Warrior Lady. She is really, really powerful. She was limited for quite some time, although during Edison format you could play 3 copies of her. Basically, if she battles with a monster, you can choose to make it so that both she and the opposing monster are banished. So really powerful removal card, can get rid of any powerful monster. Your opponent could invest a whole load of resources into summoning a really strong monster, and then you can just get rid of it with her. Next up, 3 copies of DD Survivor. DD Survivor is pretty good. He's like a tree-born frog for the deck, because so long as one of your floodgates, Macrocosmos, or Dimensional Fissure is on the field, if he leaves the field while being face up and gets banished, he comes back during the end phase of that turn, and he's actually not too bad for a level 4 monster. 1800 attack is pretty standard, pretty solid. So it's an 1800 monster that can constantly revive itself all the time if you 1 your floodgates up, and be used as tribute fodder for more powerful monsters. Next up, 2 copies of DD Assailant. Similar to DD Warrior Lady, if a monster destroys her by battle, you can basically make it so that this card and the opponent's monster is banished. So another great removal card, and also 1700 attack for level 4 is pretty good. And then 2 copies of DD Warrior. Basically, similar effect again to DD Warrior Lady. If he battles with an opponent's monster, that monster and him both get banished. Unfortunately, with DD Warrior, that effect is mandatory. Yeah, so if he battles with anything, that card's being banished, and he's also going to get banished. One of the strategies of the deck is to kind of take advantage of these cards and kind of reuse them, and for that reason I play 2 copies of Dimensional Alchemist. So with Dimensional Alchemist, when he's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can add back one of your banished monsters from back to your hand. So what's great about him is if your opponent gets rid of him, he'll add you back a card, and you can use them to search back one of your DD monsters and use their powerful removal effects once again. Now, he does conflict with Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure because he has to hit the graveyard for this effect, but that's not actually, from playtesting and everything, it's actually not that bad, because there are going to be times when your opponent is going to use an MST or a Dust Tornado or something like that to destroy your floodgates, or you can just summon him and use him before you destroy the floodgates. He's got 1300 attack, but he can banish the top card of your deck to gain an extra 500 attack until the end phase. He's pretty solid card, given that, you know, he replaces himself if he's destroyed, and also deck thins a bit. And then 2 copies of Cyber Dragon, just a really good strong 2100 beat stick, and if you happen to play against a machine deck, you can contact fusion into Chimeratech Fortress Dragon as well. So Cyber Dragon's really great. And then 2 copies of Thunder King Ryo, again another removal option. He stops your opponent from searching cards from their deck to their hand, and if your opponent special summons, you contribute him and get rid of that special summon monster. And plus he's a 1900 beat stick. He's a very hard card to get around. And then to round off the monsters in the main deck, 2 copies of Battle Fader. Great tribute fodder card, great last ditch card, especially with, you know, your DD monsters, since they're constantly banishing themselves. You will sometimes have an open field, and so Battle Fader helps protect against that. And now moving on to the spell cards, I play 2 copies of Nobleman of Extermination. Basically, this is just really good spell and trap removal. It destroys a face down spell or trap, and then banishes all copies of that card in both players' decks. 1 copy of Mystical Space Typhoon. 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army to search out your variety of different warrior monsters. 1 copy of Brain Control to help take an opponent's monster and then tribute it off for your Caius, or maybe Cyber Dragon if you want. 1 copy of Heavy Storm. Again, it conflicts with the floodgate cards, but like I said, you know, your opponent's often going to be able to destroy your floodgates, and then, you know, your Heavy Storm becomes alive then. Next up, 2 copies of Dimensional Fissure. This is one of the main floodgate cards. Any monster that would be sent to the graveyard gets banished instead of that. So what this card does is it basically messes up your opponent's strategy completely if they rely on the graveyard at all. And then 3 copies of Macrocosmos, a similar effect, except it banishes all cards, not just monsters. And also it can special summon a monster called Helios, the Primordial Sun, which is an effect that people often forget about. So you can actually, if you have like a Solemn Warning or something like that, you can actually negate this card with it, which is kind of funny. 2 copies of Dimensional Prison. Often you will be wide open from time to time, so this card is really useful as additional removal option. One thing I love about this deck is it has removal for days. So very few monsters your opponent's going to be able to summon are actually going to pose a serious threat to this deck. 1 copy of Royal Oppression. I only like to play the 1 copy of this card because it does kind of get in the way of your floodgate monster. And sometimes drawing 2, the second one can kind of be a bit of a dead draw, so I like the 1 copy in this deck. 1 copy of Starlight Road. Because we have so many continuous cards, I like to have a copy of this card to be able to protect, you know, from Heavy Storm and things like that. 1 copy of Torrential Tribute, with no explanation really needed. Goes very well with your DD Survivor. 1 copy of Mirror Force. 1 copy of Return from the Different Dimension. This card is really fun. It's a really great way to like finish off your opponent. Basically you pay half of your life points and then special summon as many of your banished monsters as possible. Absolutely insanely overpowered. They all get banished during the end phase, but often you can use it to just finish off your opponent right then and there, because you're going to attack with like 5 monsters, or you can use it to like get rid of a bunch of your opponent's cards all at once. So it's often well worth the investment. Then lastly, 1 copy of Trap Dust Shooter, and that rounds off the main deck. So for the extra deck, you can pretty much play whatever variety of synchros you want, but the 2 most important cards to have are Chimeratech Fortress Dragon for Cyber Dragon to be able to contact fusion when your opponent has machine monsters, and then also Stardust Dragon for the sake of Starlight Road. And onto the side deck now. I like to side into a slightly different strategy. The main deck is mainly focused on using different dimension monsters, but the side deck strategy is focused on using Monarch and tribute monsters. So I kind of, main deck is like a different dimension control strategy, and then I side into a macro Monarch strategy. So I play one copy of Dark Dust Spirit. When he's summoned, he destroys all other monsters on the field, and then because he's a spirit monster, he returns to your hand during the end phase. But with, you know, your DD Survivor and one other monster, he can constantly, you know, that are constantly recurrent. You should have plenty of tribute fodder for him to be able to use his effect again and again. One copy of Mobius the Frost Monarch, great spell and trap removal card. One copy of Rise of the Storm Monarch, just another, the second best Monarch for dealing with monsters and stuff after Caius. And then the other tribute fodder monster is Different Dimension Scout Plane. He's similar to effect to DD Survivor. Basically, if he gets banished, he special summons himself into attack position during the end phase of that turn. Now, the difference between him and DD Survivor is that he's a little bit weaker, so he's only got 800 attacks, so your opponent can attack him and deal a bunch of damage to you, so you have to be careful with that. But also, an advantage of DD Scout Plane is he doesn't have to be face up from the field when he's banished. You can banish him from your hand, from your deck. He can be face up or face down on the field, and he'll still be able to special summon himself, so he's a good bit more resilient in that way than DD Survivor. One copy of Krebons to negate attacks, and you can potentially be used as tribute fodder, but also just a good tuner monster as well to go into synchros. One copy of Helios the Primordial Sun, and it actually can be pretty useful when you are playing the Macro Monarch strategy, because sometimes you can special activate Macrocosmos, special summon this card, and then go for a tribute summon. Now sometimes you do dead draw this card, and that sucks too, but I kind of wanted to include it because I like the card a lot. Professor Banner, you know, he's a pretty cool character. Next up, 2 copies of Enemy Controller. This card really works well with DD Scout Plane and DD Survivor. If you have the Floodgates on board, you can use its effect to tribute them and then take control of your opponent's monster, and then you can tribute your opponent's monster for one of your Monarchs. With your Floodgate on board, your DD Survivor or Scout Plane will be able to return to the field at the end of that turn. One copy of Allure of Darkness. I play this in side deck for the Macro Monarch strategy because I really want to be able to draw into my tribute fodder monsters more easily. And then also I play in the side deck one copy of Grand Convergence. It's like a dark hole. If you have Macrocosmos on the field, it destroys all monsters on the field, and then also randomly burns your opponent for 300 points of damage. It's also a quick play spell, which means you can activate it, you can set it and activate it on your opponent's turn. It's really powerful. And then to round off the side deck, play some trap cards. 2 Dust Tornadoes. I side Nobleman of Extermination out for these if Nobleman of Extermination isn't as good against whatever matchup I'm playing against. And then 2 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole. This card's a really powerful trap card, but it's not necessarily going to be useful against absolutely every deck you're going to encounter, because not every deck is going to play a bunch of monsters with more than 1500 attack. So guys, that's pretty much it for this deck profile. I'll see you in the next deck profile video, and thanks again for watching. Take care.